I'm going to be talking about developing performance measurement tools for the local immigration partnerships and the Réseaux. And this is a project that did come out of the discussions we had last year. It involved a number of people, and it was funded by CIC. So the goal of this project was really to provide some recommendations for a coordinated performance measurement and monitoring strategy for LIPs and RIFs. And both networks do involve collaborative governance arrangements among a number of stakeholders, and they have the goal of improving coordination among players so that the benefits of immigration for communities are realized. Now, in the case of the Réseaux, the communities are Francophone minority communities, and the emphasis is on the attraction and retention of Francophone newcomers and the strengthening of Francophone institutions. As David mentioned, RIFs and LIFs have a relatively unique nature in that they don't do direct service delivery for the most part. Rather, they are planning and coordinating bodies. So why do we need performance measurement, and what is the benefits of that? So basically, the RIFs and the LIFs work at a high level, and they set strategic priorities, they support activities that target these priorities, and they promote collaboration, coordination, engagement, and awareness, and they build capacity. And we hear a lot about building capacity, and then the central issue is, what do we measure? And David's mentioned this already. And most importantly, what type of changes can we actually attribute to the RIFs and LIPs, and how do we make those attributions? So we know that there's a particular outcome in a community. How do we know that the LIP or the RIF was involved in that outcome? So the purpose of a performance measurement strategy is really twofold. It has benefits for the LIPs and RIFs themselves and also for CIC. So for the LIPs and RIFs themselves, doing performance measurement helps them to shape directions, develop plans, actions, and make decisions. So how are we doing, and then how does that help us move forward? And you can then make any necessary adjustments based on being able to see how you are performing. For CIC, it's important to equip CIC with analytic tools and data to improve strategic and operational planning, and also really to, as David mentioned, justify the continuing funding. So as I mentioned, this is based on a project that we completed just a while ago, and it had a number of different steps. It included broad level analyses, plus detailed analyses of 7 Réseaux and 13 LIPs in locations where they coexist. It was a multi-method approach, so we mapped the geographic coverage and the major institutional participants in the RIFs and LIPs. We did document analysis, and then we did interviews with the targeted members of the targeted LIPs, including members who sit on their councils, the coordinators, etc., and we did over 80 interviews. And this is just an indication of the LIPs and the RIFs that were included in our in-depth analyses. And so you can see many of them are in Ontario. We tried to have representation outside of Ontario as well, including British Columbia, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador, where the LIPs tend to be a bit more recent. Okay, so why did we do the geographic mapping? Well, mapping is important for a couple of different reasons. First of all, having a map of where the different LIPs and RIFs exist is important because it gives you a bird's eye view of the location of these different networks. It's also really important if we're ever going to do analyses of large-scale data sets. If you have a listing of what are the census divisions or the subdivisions within a particular LIP or RIF, then you can use surveys like the National Household Survey or the Canadian Community Health Survey using the data for those locations. And this just gives you an idea of one of the maps that we produced. So this is the Southern Ontario LIPs. Okay, so one of the things we were asked to look at was what are the current performance measurement strategies that the LIPs and RIFs are using. So first of all, starting with the LIPs, almost all the LIPs in our sample had engaged in some form of performance measurement on a relatively regular basis, and they included a wide range of indicators. So they recorded activities, products, events, new partnerships. Some of the LIPs looked at feedback from LIP members. When they had events, they would do feedback surveys. Some of the LIPs were involved in primary data collection, where they did surveys, for example, of their community, or surveys of community organizations. organizations, and some of them even did analyses of large-scale pre-existing data sets, such as the census data. For the RIFs, the expectations for performance measurement have been a bit less clear, and thus the RIFs have been a bit less likely to systematically collect performance measures to date. So the number of indicators is a bit smaller, but they did do things like listing and coding of activities and events and matching these up with strategic goals and objectives. They collected feedback from members of their RIF and from people participating in events, and they sometimes collected data in the broader community. So, for example, one of the RIFs did a survey of the cultural communities within their scope about the work of the RIF and how it was influencing them. So what are the drawbacks of this strategy? Well, with some exceptions, the LIPs and RIFs are operating in isolation in collecting performance measures. So they don't benefit from sharing tools, experience, and collective expertise, and really it does reduce the overall effectiveness and it drives up costs. So if each LIP or RIF is designing its own measures based on the ability to do so, we know the coordinators are very busy, and then being able to develop measures is an added layer. Some of them hire consultants to assist with performance measurement, and they pay for survey designs or individual custom tabulations. There's an economy of scale, so doing this more collectively would be more efficient. And without a common set of measures, you really can't compare across LIPs or across RIFs. So based on the interviews, the document analysis, all the work that we did come up with a proposed performance measurement and monitoring strategy. And our suggestion is that a pool of common tools be developed for performance measurement for the LIPs and RIFs. And what we suggest is that there be a set of core measures that are completed by all LIPs and RIFs on a relatively regular basis, and then that there be discretional measures that are used as needed. So that allows you to do comparison because there are some core measures. The discretion means that there's flexibility. And in order to refresh and update the tools, we would encourage the LIPs and RIFs to experiment with new measures, and if they're successful, perhaps nominate them for the pool. And of course, we also suggest workshops of researchers and LIP and RIF coordinators to discuss these measurement strategies. So this type of strategy will lead to the development of a pool of valid and reliable measures that are being tested repeatedly. It provides consistency for purposes of comparison. Consistency is also important if you're going to measure progress over time. So if you take different measures at different points in time, you can't really track progress very well. And we'll also be able to develop a cumulative body of knowledge about the outcomes of the LIPs and RIFs. And importantly, the LIPs and RIFs can then collaborate in performance measurement, which will be much more efficient and economical. So it reduces resources required for performance measurement in terms of coordinator time and data collection and analysis costs. So once you come up with this suggestion that we should develop a pool of common tools, what should those tools be? So of course we think that they should focus on the targeted short-term and long-term outcomes of the LIPs and RIFs. One really important consideration is that we go beyond the self-report of outcomes by the LIP and the RIF. It can't just be the LIP reporting on what they're doing, really having those measures, but also more objective measures and broader measures from the community is also really important. So we suggest that in addition to those measures, we include 3 other types of data, including measures collected from individuals participating in the partnership. So that might be, how is your council working? And there are several really good measures out there looking at collaboration, for example. Measures collected in the broader community from those who are the target of outcomes. So mainstream organizations, Francophone immigrants, host community, and analysis of large-scale pre-existing data sets. So I won't go through this whole table, but this really tells you the benefits and some of the drawbacks of each of those measures. And the idea really is that if we collect all these different types of measures, we'll do best because they each have some good points and some less good points. The ones that are more proximal and are perhaps easier to collect are more short-term, and they tend to be a bit more subjective, and they don't necessarily look at community outcomes. The community outcomes are a bit more distant coastal, perhaps much more resource heavy in terms of measurement, and it's a bit less possible to directly attribute all those changes to the LIP. But doing these as a package, we think will be the best strategy. So just to go through these really briefly, systematic recording of the outputs and the outcomes by the LIP or RIF staff can be used to do a number of things. Can be used to assess partnerships and collaborations, who's collaborating, how many organizations are involved in the network, how capable is the network of implementing strategic plans, is there enhanced engagement and awareness of the needs and issues surrounding immigration among a wide array of players, and also you can record leveraging of resources. Data collected from individuals who participate in the LIP or RIF and from those attending events can be used again to measure some of the same things, partnerships, engagement, also information sharing. How much are groups who participate in a LIP starting to share information that they didn't necessarily share before? And is there increased capacity to support settlement and integration? In terms of data collected in the broader community, it can be used to assess things like, do mainstream services know more about the needs of immigrants and immigrant communities? Is there coordination of services at the community level? You can look at whether the community is a welcoming and receptive community. If you do a survey, for example, of your community. Is there enhanced knowledge, accessibility, and uptake of services? And of course, the long-term outcome that we're all aiming for is there economic, social, civic, and cultural integration of immigrants in that community. And then, of course, we have these great data sets that are perhaps a bit underutilized, and they can be used as well for these communities to give us some of these performance measures. So some of the large-scale data sets can tell us something about attraction and retention. Are people staying? Are people coming to the community? Are they staying in the community? Is the community a welcoming community from some of our large-scale surveys? And something like the Canadian Community Health Survey might tell us, for example, about social integration and how well newcomers are doing in that community. One thing I want to mention is the relation between these performance measures and the logic models. If you looked at those logic models quickly, I think, during that presentation, you see that there are short-term outcomes and then arrows to intermediate outcomes and then arrows to more long-term outcomes. And assuming that the logic models really imply a causal process in which you start with the short-term outcomes and they're feeding into the long-term outcomes, it would be really useful to test this. Is it the case that those short-term outcomes are leading to the long-term outcomes that we're looking for? This would validate the processes that the LIPs and RIFs are using to promote positive long-term outcomes, and they would also suggest areas that might need to be adjusted and areas that need more work. So one thing you could test, for example, if you had all these different pieces of data, is enhanced awareness among a broader range of players, leading to increased adaptation of services. You could look at whether the diversity of players who are involved in a network leads to improved outcomes. These are just some examples. But if we take those logic models seriously, we're assuming that those pieces actually feed from one to the other. And it would be really useful to test that. Okay, so that was a lot in a short time, but just to conclude, we agree that performance measurement is really important for the LIPs and RIFs and for CIC. Currently, many of the LIPs and RIFs are working in isolation. They're just developing performance measures as they can. And a more systematic and efficient process for deciding on the performance measures and then on collecting and analyzing the data would be very beneficial. And as I suggested, these data should not only include data collected by the LIP or RIF staff, but also data collected from individuals who are participating in these networks, data collected in the broader community, and analyses of large-scale pre-existing data sets. And our full report is available in both English and French on the Pathways to Prosperity website, and I encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you.